The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Admiral Richardson stepped out of his staff car, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. At 58, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent 35 years climbing the military hierarchy. His chest displayed rows of ribbons earned through decades of service, deployments across 3 continents, and command of some of the Navy's most prestigious vessels. Richardson had been summoned to Joint Base Andrews for what his aide described as a routine inter-service coordination meeting. He expected the usual bureaucratic discussions about resource allocation and training schedules. What he didn't expect was to find himself questioning the credentials of a woman who appeared far too young to hold any significant military position. The conference room buzzed with the quiet efficiency of military personnel preparing for a briefing. Richardson nodded to familiar faces, colonels, captains, and other senior officers he had worked with over the years. His eyes swept across the room until they settled on a figure that made him pause. A woman in an Air Force uniform sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with focused intensity. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with short-cropped auburn hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Richardson frowned slightly. In his experience, the person sitting in the position of authority at such meetings was typically a seasoned officer with visible signs of long service, gray at the temples, perhaps, or the weathered look that came from years of responsibility. This woman looked like she could have graduated from the academy just yesterday. As he took his seat, Richardson leaned toward Colonel Martinez, an Army officer he had known for years. "Who's the Air Force representative?" he asked quietly, nodding toward the woman at the head of the table. Martinez glanced up from his tablet. "That's General Thompson," he replied matter-of-factly, then returned to his notes. Richardson's eyebrows shot up. "General? Are you certain? She looks like she should be a lieutenant, maybe captain at best." His voice carried just enough volume that several nearby officers turned their heads. The woman at the head of the table didn't seem to notice, continuing her document review with professional focus. The Admiral's military mind struggled to process what he was seeing. In his experience, generals had earned their stars through decades of service, command experience, and proven leadership in challenging situations. The math simply didn't add up. If this woman was truly a general, she would have had to achieve that rank at an unprecedented pace, something that went against everything Richardson understood about military promotion timelines. Colonel Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sir, I believe General Thompson has quite an impressive record," he said carefully, clearly hoping to end the conversation before it attracted more attention. But Richardson was not easily deterred. He had built his career on attention to detail and asking the hard questions that others might shy away from. If there was something unusual about the chain of command in this room, he felt it was his duty to understand it. After all, effective military operations depended on clear hierarchies and mutual respect among officers of all ranks. Impressive record or not, Richardson continued, his voice now drawing the attention of more officers in the room, there are certain standards and timelines that govern military advancement. I've never seen anyone achieve general rank before their 40th birthday, regardless of their branch of service. The room began to quiet as Richardson's comments filtered through the gathered officers. Some nodded in agreement, sharing his confusion, while others looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The woman at the head of the table, General Thompson, according to Martinez, finally looked up from her documents. Her green eyes met Richardson's across the room with a calm, measured gaze that revealed nothing of her thoughts. She didn't appear angry or defensive, merely observant, as if she were studying an interesting specimen under a microscope. For a moment, the two officers regarded each other in silence, the weight of unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. Richardson felt a strange sensation, as if he were standing at the edge of a precipice without realizing how he had gotten there. Something in General Thompson's steady gaze suggested that his assumptions about her rank, her experience, and perhaps even her identity, were about to be challenged in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The Admiral cleared his throat and decided to address the situation directly. After all, military protocol demanded clarity in all matters of rank and command structure. He had always prided himself on being straightforward in his professional dealings, and he saw no reason to change that approach now. "Excuse me, General Thompson," he said, rising slightly from his seat in a gesture of formal military courtesy. "I hope you'll forgive my confusion, but I'm having difficulty understanding your position in this briefing. Your rank seems unusually advanced for someone of your apparent age and experience level." The room fell completely silent. Every officer present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented: a senior admiral publicly questioning the credentials of a general officer. Such challenges to authority were rare in military settings and typically handled through private channels rather than public forums. General Thompson set down her pen with deliberate precision and folded her hands on the table before her. When she spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of someone completely comfortable with her position and credentials. "Admiral Richardson," she said, her tone neither defensive nor aggressive, simply professional, "I appreciate your attention to detail. It's a quality that has undoubtedly served you well throughout your distinguished naval career. However, I believe there may be some aspects of my background and current position that you're not fully aware of." Richardson felt a flicker of uncertainty. There was something in her tone, not arrogance, but absolute confidence, that suggested he might be missing crucial information. Still, he pressed forward, committed now to seeing this conversation through to its conclusion. "With all due respect, General, I've been in the military for over 3 decades. I understand promotion timelines, command structures, and the typical career progression for officers in all branches. What I'm seeing here doesn't align with those established patterns." General Thompson nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the validity of his experience while simultaneously preparing to demonstrate why that experience might be insufficient for understanding her particular situation. The other officers in the room watched with the fascination of spectators at a high-stakes chess match, uncertain of who held the stronger position but keenly aware that the next few moves would determine the outcome. "You're absolutely correct about traditional promotion timelines, Admiral," General Thompson replied. "In most cases, the path to general rank follows well-established patterns that take decades to complete. However, there are certain circumstances and career tracks that can accelerate that timeline significantly." She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. "I suspect that once you're fully briefed on my background and current responsibilities, your concerns will be addressed. But I think it would be appropriate to proceed with our scheduled agenda first, and then address any remaining questions privately afterward." Richardson found himself at a crossroads. Military protocol suggested he should accept the general's proposal and allow the meeting to continue as planned. But his instincts told him that something fundamental was at stake here, something that went beyond simple questions of rank and promotion timelines. He had spent too many years in positions of authority to ignore the subtle dynamics of power and respect that governed military relationships. The Admiral realized that his next words would determine not only the immediate course of this meeting but also potentially impact his professional reputation and relationships within the Joint Command structure. He was about to discover that some questions, once asked, cannot be easily withdrawn, and some challenges, once issued, must be seen through to their conclusion regardless of the consequences. Admiral Richardson felt the weight of every gaze in the room as he considered his response. Years of command experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts were telling him that backing down now would be seen as a sign of weakness. He had built his reputation on thorough preparation and attention to detail, qualities that had served him well in combat zones and diplomatic situations alike. "General Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his rank, "I believe this issue needs to be clarified before we proceed. Chain of command and proper credentials are fundamental to military operations. If there are extraordinary circumstances surrounding your promotion, then they should be a matter of record that all senior officers present can verify." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others leaned forward with the keen interest of those witnessing a potentially career-defining moment. Colonel Martinez caught Richardson's eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning that the Admiral chose to ignore. General Thompson remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged. When she spoke, there was a subtle shift in her tone, not louder, but somehow more commanding, as if she were drawing upon reserves of authority that hadn't been visible moments before. "Admiral, I'm going to give you one opportunity to reconsider your approach," she said quietly. I understand that my appearance may not match your expectations for someone in my position. However, your continued questioning of my credentials in this public forum is beginning to border on insubordination." Richardson felt a surge of indignation. Insubordination? He was a senior admiral with an unblemished record of service spanning 3.5 decades. He had commanded battle groups, overseen multinational operations, and earned the respect of officers across all branches of the military. The suggestion that he was being insubordinate for asking legitimate questions about chain of command struck him as absurd. "General Thompson," he said, his voice rising slightly, "I have served this country with distinction for 35 years. I have never been accused of insubordination, and I don't appreciate the implication that asking for clarification about your qualifications constitutes inappropriate behavior." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired cannon. Richardson realized he had just escalated the confrontation significantly, but he felt justified in defending his professional reputation. Around the table, officers began to exchange meaningful glances, the kind of wordless communication that indicated they understood they were witnessing something that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. General Thompson stood slowly, her movement deliberate and measured. As she rose to her full height, there was something commanding about her presence that hadn't been apparent while she was seated. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a leather credential case, which she placed on the table with a soft thud. "Admiral Richardson," she said, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority, "you've questioned my rank, my qualifications, and my right to be in this position. You've done so publicly, in front of subordinate officers, and despite multiple opportunities to handle this matter more appropriately." She opened the credential case and slid it across the table toward him. "I think it's time you understood exactly who you're dealing with." Richardson leaned forward to examine the credentials, expecting to see the standard military identification that would confirm her rank as a general. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The identification bore the seal of the Pentagon, but below General Thompson's photo and basic information was a designation he had only heard whispered about in the highest levels of military command: Base General, Special Access Programs. His hands trembling slightly, Richardson picked up the credentials for closer examination. The security clearance levels listed were beyond anything he had ever seen, even during his most sensitive assignments. The authorization codes indicated access to programs that were so classified that most general officers would never even know they existed. "Base General," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Around the table, several officers leaned forward, straining to hear what had suddenly drained the color from the Admiral's face. General Thompson retrieved her credentials and returned them to her pocket. "Base General is a designation that exists outside normal military promotion timelines, Admiral. It's reserved for officers who have demonstrated exceptional capabilities in areas that are critical to national security but cannot be discussed in traditional military channels." Richardson felt as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly shifted. Everything he thought he understood about military hierarchy and promotion structures was being rewritten before his eyes. Base generals were something of a legend in military circles, officers whose ranks and responsibilities transcended normal command structures, but whose actual roles were so classified that most senior officers were never certain if they actually existed. The designation comes with authority that supersedes traditional rank structures in specific operational areas, General Thompson continued, her voice now carrying the weight of absolute command. "While you outrank me in the conventional military hierarchy, Admiral, in matters related to special access programs and joint operations security, my authority is paramount." The Admiral's mind raced as he tried to process the implications of what he was learning. If General Thompson truly held the rank of Base General, then she would have access to information and operational authority that could impact every branch of the military. More importantly, it meant that his public challenge to her credentials had just become a serious breach of protocol that could have far-reaching consequences for his career. "Furthermore," General Thompson said, moving around the table with the confidence of someone completely in control of the situation, "your continued questioning of my position, despite clear indications that you were operating with incomplete information, suggests a concerning lack of judgment that I will be required to report through appropriate channels." Richardson felt a chill of real fear.
Reports to appropriate channels in cases involving special access programs could mean anything from a formal reprimand to the end of a military career.
His challenge to General Thompson's authority, which had seemed reasonable just minutes before, now appeared to be a catastrophic error in judgment.
The other officers in the room watched with the horrified fascination of bystanders at a car accident.
They understood that they were witnessing the destruction of a senior officer's reputation in real time, and that the reverberations would likely impact everyone present. Some began to consider how they might distance themselves from Richardson's position, while others wondered if their mere presence at this confrontation would somehow implicate them in his error. General Thompson returned to her position at the head of the table, but she remained standing, a subtle reminder of her authority in the room.
Admiral Richardson, you will resume your seat and remain silent for the remainder of this briefing. Following our conclusion, you will report to my office for a private discussion about your conduct and its implications.
Richardson sank into his chair, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and growing realization of the magnitude of his mistake. The man who had entered this room confident in his authority and experience now found himself completely outmaneuvered by an officer whose true capabilities he had catastrophically underestimated. The silence in the room was deafening as General Thompson calmly returned to her documents, preparing to begin the briefing as if nothing had happened. But everyone present understood that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power, and that Admiral Richardson's career would never be quite the same. As the general began her presentation on Joint Operations Security Protocols, Richardson sat in stunned silence, contemplating how a routine morning meeting had become the most professionally damaging hour of his distinguished military career. He was about to learn that questioning the wrong person's authority could have consequences that extended far beyond hurt pride or professional embarrassment. The briefing proceeded with mechanical precision, but Admiral Richardson absorbed virtually nothing of the content. His mind churned with questions and growing dread as he watched General Thompson command the room with effortless authority. Every gesture, every response to questions from other officers, demonstrated a depth of knowledge and command presence that he was only now beginning to appreciate. She discussed operational security protocols with the fluency of someone who had designed them. When Colonel Martinez asked about coordination between naval and Air Force assets in classified operations, her response revealed familiarity with submarine deployment patterns that were known only to the most senior naval commanders. When a Marine Corps representative inquired about joint training exercises, she referenced specific facilities and programs that Richardson knew were so classified that even he had only limited access to information about them. As the presentation continued, Richardson began to understand the true scope of his error. General Thompson wasn't simply a young officer who had been promoted ahead of normal timelines, she was operating at a level of military command that existed in the shadows of the conventional structure he thought he understood completely. The base general designation apparently came with knowledge and authority that transcended traditional service boundaries. When the formal briefing concluded, the room emptied quickly. Officers who normally would have lingered to discuss operational details or exchange pleasantries instead gathered their materials and departed with unusual haste. Richardson found himself alone with General Thompson, who was methodically organizing her documents with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the morning. "Admiral," she said without looking up from her papers, "my office is in Building 7. You'll report there in 15 minutes. Use that time to consider whether you want this conversation to be about salvaging your career or accepting its conclusion." Richardson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning system. The casual way she discussed the potential end of his career drove home the reality that he was dealing with someone whose authority extended far beyond what he had ever encountered. He nodded stiffly and left the conference room, his mind racing with possible explanations he might offer for his conduct. Building 7 was a nondescript structure that Richardson had passed countless times without giving it much thought. As he approached the entrance, he noticed security features that had escaped his attention before: discrete cameras, reinforced door frames, and card readers that required clearance levels he didn't possess. A young lieutenant checked his identification and escorted him through corridors that seemed oddly sterile, lacking the usual military decorations and unit insignias that marked most base facilities. General Thompson's office was larger than he had expected, with walls lined with commendations and photographs that told a story he was only beginning to piece together. He recognized several faces in the photos: senior Pentagon officials, former defense secretaries, and at least one former president. In one image, a much younger version of General Thompson stood alongside officers who Richardson knew had been involved in some of the military's most sensitive operations over the past decade. She gestured for him to take a seat across from her desk, then settled into her chair with the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable with wielding authority. For several moments, she studied him in silence, and Richardson had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated according to criteria he couldn't understand. "Admiral Richardson," she finally said, "I want you to understand something that very few officers in the conventional military structure are ever required to confront. The rank of base general exists because there are operational necessities that transcend normal command hierarchies. Officers who hold this designation have been selected based on capabilities and clearances that exist outside traditional promotion pathways." Richardson listened with growing comprehension of how far out of his depth he had wandered. "General Thompson, I owe you an apology. I acted based on incomplete information and made assumptions that were clearly inappropriate." She nodded slowly. "Your apology is noted, Admiral, but the issue extends beyond personal courtesy. Your public challenge to my authority was witnessed by multiple officers who will undoubtedly discuss this incident throughout their respective command structures. Questions about my credentials and legitimacy will now circulate in ways that could compromise operational security." The Admiral felt his stomach drop as he realized the broader implications of his mistake. His public questioning hadn't just been a personal affront to General Thompson, it had potentially created security risks that could impact classified programs he knew nothing about. "I need to understand what my actions might have compromised," he said carefully. "If there are security concerns resulting from my conduct, I want to help address them in whatever way possible." General Thompson leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression that suggested she was weighing multiple factors he couldn't see. "The programs I oversee involve coordination between agencies and military units that operate under deep classification. Officers in those programs trust that their command structure is secure and unquestioned. Your public challenge has introduced doubt into that equation." She stood and moved to a window that overlooked the base, her back to Richardson as she continued. "Base generals are appointed directly by the Secretary of Defense in consultation with the Joint Chiefs and intelligence leadership. The selection process involves psychological evaluation, extensive background investigation, and demonstrated performance in operations that cannot be acknowledged publicly. Age is irrelevant compared to capability and trustworthiness." Richardson was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into a confrontation with someone whose role in the military was far more significant than he had ever imagined. "General, what can I do to minimize the damage I've caused?" She turned back to face him, and, for the first time since their confrontation began, her expression softened slightly. "Admiral, you built a distinguished career through competence and dedication. This morning's events don't erase 35 years of service, but they do raise questions about your judgment that will need to be addressed." The weight of potential consequences settled over Richardson like a heavy blanket. He could see his career, his reputation, and his legacy disappearing because of a few minutes of misguided questions and stubborn pride. "There is one option that might allow you to recover from this situation," General Thompson said, returning to her desk. "It would require accepting an assignment that would utilize your experience in ways that serve the programs I oversee. It would also require acknowledging that there are levels of military operations that you haven't previously been exposed to." Richardson felt a flicker of hope mixed with wariness. "What kind of assignment?" "Naval liaison to special access programs," she replied. "You would retain your rank and much of your authority, but you would report directly to me on matters involving naval assets and personnel in classified operations. It would require additional security clearances and a willingness to operate outside conventional command structures." The Admiral realized he was being offered a chance at redemption that came with significant strings attached. Accepting would mean acknowledging General Thompson's superior authority and placing himself under the command of an officer he had publicly questioned. Declining would likely mean facing the consequences of his actions through formal disciplinary channels. "I would need to understand the full scope of what such an assignment would entail," he said carefully. General Thompson smiled for the first time since their confrontation began. Admiral, if you accept this position, you'll discover that the military operates on levels that most senior officers never see. You'll be briefed on programs that would challenge every assumption you've made about national defense and military capability. It's an opportunity to serve your country in ways you never imagined possible. Richardson found himself at the threshold of a decision that would reshape the remainder of his military career. He was being offered entrance into a world he had never known existed, but the price of admission was acknowledging that his understanding of military command had been fundamentally incomplete. 3 weeks later, Admiral Richardson sat in a secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon, reading intelligence reports that redefined his understanding of global military operations. The clearance levels General Thompson had arranged for him provided access to information that explained why base generals operated outside conventional command structures. The programs he was now briefed on involved coordination between military units, intelligence agencies, and allied forces in operations that could never be acknowledged publicly.
His new role as naval liaison to special access programs had proven to be both humbling and enlightening.
The assignment required him to coordinate naval assets for missions that didn't officially exist, supporting operations that protected national interests in ways the public would never know. General Thompson had been right, the military operated on levels that most senior officers never imagined. The transformation in Richardson's perspective had been gradual but profound. Working directly under General Thompson's authority, he discovered that she commanded resources and personnel across all branches of the military with an efficiency that made conventional command structures seem cumbersome by comparison. Her knowledge of naval operations rivaled his own, while her understanding of joint service coordination exceeded anything he had encountered in his previous assignments. More importantly, he began to understand why officers like General Thompson were appointed to positions that transcended normal promotion timelines. The responsibilities she managed required a unique combination of tactical brilliance, political sophistication, and absolute discretion that couldn't be developed through conventional career progression. Her apparent youth, which had initially triggered his skepticism, was actually an asset in operations that required energy, adaptability, and fresh thinking. The Admiral's initial embarrassment over his public challenge to her authority had evolved into genuine respect for her capabilities. During their weekly coordination meetings, she demonstrated strategic thinking that impressed him more than any officer he had worked with at similar levels of command. Her ability to coordinate complex operations across multiple agencies while maintaining strict operational security was a masterclass in modern military leadership. One afternoon, as Richardson reviewed deployment orders for a submarine operation that officially didn't exist, General Thompson entered his office with the relaxed demeanor that had become familiar over their weeks of working together. "Admiral, I wanted to discuss the incident from our first meeting," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I think enough time has passed for us to address it frankly." Richardson looked up from his reports, prepared for a conversation he had been expecting since accepting his new assignment. "General, I've thought about that morning many times over the past few weeks. My conduct was inappropriate, and I've learned things that make me understand just how inappropriate it was." She nodded thoughtfully. "Your reaction wasn't entirely unreasonable, given the information you had available. Most senior officers would have had similar questions about my apparent age and rank. The difference is that most would have chosen to investigate those questions privately rather than challenge me publicly. I let pride override judgment," Richardson admitted. "I was so certain of my understanding of military promotion structures that I couldn't consider alternatives. It was a failure of leadership on my part." General Thompson leaned back in her chair. "Admiral, the military is evolving in ways that require new approaches to command and authority. The threats we face today don't respect traditional service boundaries or conventional strategies. Officers like myself are part of an effort to develop more flexible, responsive command structures that can address those challenges." Richardson had come to understand that reality through his new assignment. The operations he now supported required seamless coordination between Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, Army intelligence units, and CIA assets in ways that would have been impossible through traditional command channels. General Thompson's authority to direct resources from all services simultaneously was essential to the success of those missions. "I've learned more about modern warfare in the past 3 weeks than I did in the previous 5 years," Richardson said.
The scope of operations you oversee is remarkable. I understand now why traditional rank structures couldn't accommodate what you do. The base general designation was created specifically to address that limitation, she replied. Officers in these positions are selected based on demonstrated capability rather than time in service or conventional career progression. It allows the military to place the most qualified personnel in critical positions regardless of their age or traditional promotion timeline. Richardson realized that their initial confrontation had provided him with insights into military evolution that most officers his age would never receive. His challenge to her authority, while professionally damaging at the time, had ultimately opened doors to understanding levels of military operations that remained hidden from conventional command structures. General Thompson, he said carefully, I want to thank you for offering me this assignment instead of pursuing formal disciplinary action. Working in your command structure has been the most professionally rewarding experience of my career. She smiled, the same expression she had shown when offering him the liaison position weeks earlier. Admiral, your experience and expertise have been valuable additions to our operations. Your naval background has improved our coordination capabilities significantly. The incident that brought you here was a mistake in judgment, but it also demonstrated qualities that make you effective in this environment. Richardson understood that she was referring to his willingness to ask difficult questions and challenge assumptions, qualities that had gotten him into trouble initially but proved valuable when properly channeled. His decades of naval command experience, combined with his new understanding of special access programs, had made him an effective bridge between conventional and classified operations. I have one final question about our first meeting, Richardson said. How did you know that offering me this assignment would work out successfully? You took a significant risk bringing someone who had publicly challenged your authority into such a sensitive position. General Thompson's expression became thoughtful. Admiral, officers who reach senior positions in any branch of the military have demonstrated competence, dedication, and leadership capabilities. Your challenge to my authority was based on incomplete information, not character flaws. I believed that once you understood the full scope of what we do here, you would become a valuable contributor rather than a continued problem. The Admiral realized that her decision to offer him the liaison position had been based on the same strategic thinking that made her effective in managing complex military operations. She had evaluated the risks and benefits of bringing him into her command structure and determined that his potential contributions outweighed the risks posed by his initial hostility. 6 months later, Richardson found himself briefing the Secretary of Defense on naval asset allocation for operations that would never appear in any official military records. His transformation from skeptical challenger to trusted subordinate was complete, but, more importantly, he had gained access to a level of military service that provided deeper satisfaction than any conventional command position. As he concluded his briefing and watched General Thompson coordinate follow-up actions with various agency representatives, Richardson reflected on how dramatically his career had changed since that morning when he had questioned her rank. His initial assumption that military authority followed predictable patterns had been shattered, replaced by understanding that effective leadership could emerge from unexpected sources and take forms that transcended conventional structures. The Admiral's last remaining regret was not personal. He had recovered professionally and found more meaningful work than he had ever imagined possible. Instead, he regretted that other senior officers would likely never have the opportunity to discover the remarkable capabilities that existed in the shadows of the conventional military structure, capabilities embodied by officers like General Thompson who served with distinction in roles that could never be publicly acknowledged. His journey from skeptic to believer had taught him that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from being completely wrong about something important, and that true leadership can be found in the most unexpected places when one has the wisdom to recognize it.